She attracted broken people to fix, until she realized she was the most broken. Maya Chen had a gift for finding wounded souls in crowded rooms. At 36, she'd built a thriving therapy practice, specializing in trauma recovery, and her personal life looked like a continuous rescue mission. Her ex-boyfriend Jake had been a recovering addict she'd met in group therapy. Her best friend Lisa was a survivor of domestic abuse who still called Maya at 2 a.m. during panic attacks. Her current romantic interest, Daniel, was a war veteran struggling with PTSD who'd never been in a healthy relationship. Maya told herself this pattern was coincidence. She was a helper by nature, drawn to psychology because she genuinely wanted to heal the world's pain. If broken people gravitated toward her, it was simply because she had the skills and compassion to help them. But sitting in her pristine office on a Tuesday evening, reviewing case notes from a day spent listening to other people's trauma, Maya felt something she couldn't quite name. A hollow exhaustion that had nothing to do with being tired. She felt like she was drowning in everyone else's pain while her own remained carefully locked away. The thought disturbed her so much that she immediately pushed it aside. Maya Chen didn't have trauma. Maya Chen was the one who helped people work through trauma. She was the healer, not the wounded. But the feeling wouldn't leave her alone. What Maya couldn't acknowledge was that her entire office setup reflected her compulsive need to be the helper. She'd arranged the furniture so that her clients sat in the soft, comfortable chair while she sat in the more clinical, professional chair, physically positioning herself as the strong one, the one who didn't need comfort. Her desk held photos of graduating classes from addiction programs she'd facilitated, thank you letters from clients who credited her with saving their lives, awards recognizing her dedication to trauma recovery. But nowhere in her office was there evidence of her own humanity, her own struggles, her own need for care. She'd created a shrine to her identity as someone who healed others, and in doing so, had made it impossible to acknowledge her own wounds. That evening, Daniel called during what had become their nightly ritual, his recounting of flashbacks, nightmares, and daily struggles, while Maya listened with professional patience, offering insights and coping strategies. "I don't know what I'd do without you," Daniel said, as he did every night. "You're the only person who understands me." Maya felt the familiar flutter of purpose that came with being needed, but underneath it was something new, resentment. When was the last time someone had asked how she was doing? When was the last time she'd been allowed to be anything other than endlessly strong, endlessly available, endlessly capable of absorbing other people's pain? "Maya, are you there?" "I'm here," she said automatically. "Tell me more about the nightmare." But as Daniel described his recurring dreams of war zones, Maya found herself thinking about her own dreams, the ones she'd been having since childhood, but never told anyone about. Dreams of being small and invisible while chaos raged around her. Dreams of calling for help and having no one hear her. Dreams that felt less like dreams and more like memories she'd spent 30 years trying to forget. The pattern, Maya was beginning to realize, extended beyond her romantic relationships. Her entire social circle consisted of people in various stages of crisis or recovery. Her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, was a widow who'd become increasingly dependent on Maya for emotional support. Her colleague, Dr. Richards, frequently dumped his difficult cases on Maya because he knew she, quote, had such a gift for the hopeless ones. Even her family dynamics followed the same script. Her younger brother called only when he needed money or advice. Her parents still treated her as the family counselor, expecting her to mediate their conflicts and solve their problems despite being in their 70s. Maya had unconsciously created a world where she was essential but never cared for, where she gave endlessly but never received. The crisis came 3 weeks later, when Maya's newest client, a young woman named Sarah who'd survived a car accident that killed her sister, had what therapists call a breakthrough. "I realized something," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "I've been trying to save everyone else because I couldn't save Emma. But all this rescuing, it's not helping them. It's just helping me avoid dealing with the fact that I failed when it mattered most." Maya felt something crack in her chest. The words hit too close to something she'd never allowed herself to examine. "That's a significant insight," Maya said, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening in her internal world. "How does it feel to recognize that pattern?" "Terrifying. Because if I'm not the rescuer, then who am I? And what am I supposed to do with all this guilt about not being able to save her?" Maya opened her mouth to offer professional guidance and found herself struggling to speak. Sarah's words were echoing in places Maya had never allowed light to reach. "Who am I if I'm not the rescuer?" The question followed Maya through the rest of her workday. As she listened to client after client process their trauma, Maya found herself wondering, what was she processing? What was she healing? What wounds was she so carefully avoiding by staying focused on everyone else's pain? That night, for the first time in her adult life, Maya called in sick to her evening sessions. She sat in her apartment, staring at the walls lined with certificates and degrees that proclaimed her expertise in healing others, and asked herself a question that felt like stepping off a cliff. What am I running from? The session with Dr. Rebecca Martinez felt like a betrayal of everything Maya stood for. For 20 years, she'd been on the other side of the therapeutic relationship, the one with answers, the one who guided others through their darkness. Now she was the one sitting in the uncomfortable chair, feeling exposed and uncertain. "What brings you here, Maya?" Dr. Martinez asked gently. Maya struggled with how to begin. "I think I might have a problem with boundaries in my personal relationships." "Tell me about that." "I seem to attract people who need fixing. Addicts, trauma survivors, people with severe mental health issues. My friends, my romantic partners, even my clients sometimes blur the lines and expect me to be available beyond normal therapeutic boundaries." "And how do you feel about being in the rescuer role?" Maya brightened slightly. This felt safer, more professional. "I feel useful, needed, like I'm fulfilling my purpose." "And what else?" The question caught Maya off guard. "What do you mean? You mentioned feeling useful and needed. But how do you feel emotionally when you're constantly rescuing others?" Maya paused, genuinely considering the question for the first time. "Exhausted. Sometimes resentful, like I'm drowning in other people's pain, and no one notices that I might be struggling too." "When did you first feel responsible for fixing other people's problems?" The question triggered something visceral in Maya's chest. Images flashed through her mind. Herself at 8 years old, trying to comfort her mother during one of her episodes. Herself at 12, mediating fights between her parents. Herself at 16, talking her mother out of what she now recognized as a suicide attempt. I don't know. I've always been the strong one, the one people turn to when they're in crisis." "What was your childhood like?" Maya's practiced response came automatically. "Normal. Stable. My parents worked hard to provide for our family." But even as she said the words, Maya felt their inadequacy. Dr. Martinez's gentle silence invited her to go deeper. "Actually," Maya said slowly, "my mother struggled with depression. Severe depression. There were times when she couldn't get out of bed for weeks. My father worked long hours to avoid dealing with it, so I became the caretaker." "How old were you when you became the caretaker?" 7? 8? I remember standing on a chair to reach the stove so I could make soup for her when she couldn't eat." What was that like for you? Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Vulnerability. Scary. I never knew if she was going to be okay from one day to the next. I felt responsible for keeping her alive. And did you succeed in keeping her alive? Yes. She's still alive. She got help eventually when I was in college. So you did save her? Maya nodded, then stopped. Something about the way Dr. Martinez said it felt significant. What if, Dr. Martinez continued gently, your adult relationships are your way of recreating that childhood dynamic? What if you keep seeking out broken people because being the rescuer is the only way you learn to feel valuable and secure in relationships? The suggestion hit Maya like a physical blow. But I help people professionally. It's my career. I'm not questioning your professional competence. I'm asking whether your personal relationships might be unconscious attempts to replay and master a childhood trauma where you felt responsible for someone's survival. Maya felt her carefully constructed worldview beginning to crumble. Are you saying I'm not actually helping people? I'm asking whether your need to help might sometimes be more about your own unresolved trauma than about what the other person actually needs. The question opened doorways in Maya's mind that she'd kept locked for decades. But Dr. Martinez wasn't finished. Maya, tell me about a typical week in your life, not your professional schedule, but how you spend your emotional energy. Maya described her routine: morning sessions with clients processing severe trauma, lunch calls from Lisa describing her latest crisis, afternoon sessions with more clients, evening phone calls with Daniel working through his PTSD symptoms, weekend visits to help her elderly neighbor with household tasks she was perfectly capable of managing herself. When do you rest? Dr. Martinez asked. I rest at night. I get adequate sleep. I don't mean physical rest. When do you emotionally rest? When is your heart not carrying someone else's pain? Maya realized she couldn't answer the question. I don't think it does rest. There's always someone who needs help. What would happen if you said no when someone asked for help? The question triggered immediate anxiety. They might get worse. They might hurt themselves. They might realize, I don't actually care about them. And how would that make you feel? Responsible, guilty, like I failed them. The way you felt when you thought you might fail to save your mother? Maya felt the connection like a lightning bolt. Yes, exactly like that. What if other people's well-being isn't actually your responsibility? The suggestion felt like heresy. But if I have the skills to help, don't I have an obligation to use them? What if your compulsive helping is sometimes more harmful than helpful, because it prevents people from developing their own strength and resilience? Maya had never considered this possibility. In her mind, helping was always good, always necessary, always her responsibility to provide. Over the following sessions, Dr. Martinez helped Maya examine her relationship patterns with uncomfortable clarity. Daniel, the war veteran she'd been dating, had never actually asked for her help. Maya had simply inserted herself into his healing process, offering unsolicited advice and emotional labor that he'd accepted but never requested. In fact, when Maya honestly reviewed their relationship, she realized Daniel had been making progress in therapy before they met, but had become more dependent on her emotional support and less engaged with his own therapeutic work since they'd been together. Lisa, her best friend, had become entirely dependent on Maya for emotional regulation. Instead of developing her own coping skills, Lisa had learned to call Maya whenever she felt distressed, creating a dynamic where Maya was responsible for another adult's emotional stability. Maya realized that in the 10 years of their friendship, Lisa had never once asked how Maya was doing or offered support during Maya's difficult times. Even in her professional life, Maya noticed she was drawn to the most severely traumatized clients, the ones who needed the most intensive intervention, the ones who made her feel most essential to their survival. She realized she was unconsciously selecting clients who made her feel indispensable rather than those who were most likely to benefit from her specific expertise. "What do you think would happen," Dr. Martinez asked during one session, "if you stopped rescuing people?" The question triggered immediate panic. They might not be okay. They might get worse. They might hurt themselves. And how would that make you feel? Responsible, guilty, like I failed them. The way you felt when you thought you might fail to save your mother? Maya felt the connection like a lightning bolt. Yes, exactly like that. What if other people's well-being isn't actually your responsibility? The suggestion felt like heresy. But if I have the skills to help, don't I have an obligation to use them? What if your compulsive helping is sometimes more harmful than helpful, because it prevents people from developing their own strength and resilience? Maya had never considered this possibility. In her mind, helping was always good, always necessary, always her responsibility to provide. I don't understand. Think about it this way. If someone is drowning and you immediately jump in to save them every time they struggle, they never learn to swim. Your rescue becomes their disability. The metaphor hit Maya with devastating clarity. How many people had she kept dependent by her compulsive helping? How many times had her need to be needed prevented someone from developing their own coping skills? But the most disturbing realization was still to come. Maya, Dr. Martinez said during their 6th session, what would happen if you allowed yourself to be the one who needed help? The question triggered something approaching terror. I can't. I'm the helper. I'm the strong one. People depend on me to have it together. What if that's the very thing that's keeping you from healing your own trauma? I don't have trauma. I help people with trauma. What would you call a childhood where you felt responsible for keeping your mother alive? Maya opened her mouth to argue and found herself speechless. She'd spent so many years focused on other people's trauma that she'd never applied the same clinical understanding to her own experiences. That was just family dysfunction, not trauma. Maya, if one of your clients told you they'd spent their childhood feeling responsible for a parent's survival, what would you call that? The answer came before Maya could stop it. Parentification, emotional neglect, childhood trauma. And what would you recommend for healing that kind of trauma? Maya felt her professional knowledge colliding with her personal denial. Therapy, processing the experiences, learning healthy boundaries, developing a sense of self that isn't dependent on caretaking others. And have you done any of that work? The question opened a chasm of recognition that Maya had been avoiding her entire adult life. No, I've been too busy helping everyone else. The breakthrough came during their 7th session, when Dr. Martinez asked Maya to try a simple exercise. I want you to imagine that 8-year-old girl standing on a chair to make soup for her depressed mother. What would you want to say to her? Maya closed her eyes and immediately saw herself, small, serious, overwhelmed by a responsibility that was far too big for her tiny shoulders. I'd tell her that it's not her job to take care of her mother, that she deserves to be taken care of instead of always being the one taking care of others. What else? I'd tell her that her mother's sadness isn't her fault, that she can't fix it by being perfect or helpful enough, that she's just a little girl who deserves to feel safe and protected. Maya felt tears streaming down her face as she spoke to her younger self. For 30 years, that little girl had been trying to prove her worth by saving everyone around her, convinced that her value lay only in her usefulness to others. How does it feel to offer that little girl compassion instead of expecting her to save everyone? Like I want to scoop her up and protect her from having to carry all that weight. What if you could offer yourself that same protection now? The concept was revolutionary. Maya had spent so long being the protector that she'd forgotten she might need protection too. The breakdown came 2 weeks later. Maya was in session with a particularly difficult client when something shifted. The client, a woman who'd been coming to therapy for 2 years without making significant progress, was describing her latest crisis with the same victim mentality she brought to every session. "I don't know what to do," the client said. "Nothing ever works out for me. I need you to tell me what to do." For the first time in her career, Maya felt something other than compassionate concern. She felt frustrated, trapped, exhausted by the weight of everyone's problems. "What do you think you should do?" Maya asked, trying to redirect the client towards self-sufficiency. "I don't know. That's why I'm here. You're supposed to have the answers." Maya felt something snap. "What if I don't have the answers? What if I'm just as lost and broken as everyone else who walks through that door?" The client looked shocked. Maya was horrified by her own words. After the session, Maya sat alone in her office and did something she hadn't done since childhood. She cried, not the controlled, cathartic tears she sometimes shed with clients, but ugly, desperate sobs that came from a place she'd been protecting for 30 years. She was exhausted from carrying everyone else's pain. She was resentful about being the strong one. She was terrified that if she stopped rescuing people, she'd have to face her own need to be rescued. Most of all, she was grieving for the 8-year-old girl who'd learned that love was conditional on being useful, who'd never been allowed to just be a child who needed care and protection. "I think I'm having a breakdown," Maya told Dr. Martinez at their emergency session that evening. "What does the breakdown feel like?" "Like everything I thought I knew about myself is wrong. Like my entire identity is built on avoiding my own pain by fixing everyone else's." "And how does that realization feel?" "Terrifying. And relieving? Like maybe I can finally stop carrying weight that was never mine to carry." Dr. Martinez nodded. "What would it feel like to be helped instead of always helping?" Maya considered the question seriously. "Foreign. Scary. Like I wouldn't know how to be worth loving if I wasn't useful. What if your worth had nothing to do with your usefulness?" The concept was so revolutionary that Maya needed several sessions to fully consider it. But gradually, something began to shift. Maya started setting boundaries with the broken people in her life. She told Daniel that she couldn't be his only source of emotional support and helped him connect with a therapist who specialized in PTSD. She had a difficult conversation with Lisa about developing other coping strategies besides calling Maya in crisis. Most importantly, Maya began the work of healing her own childhood trauma. The parentification, the emotional neglect, the terror of not being good enough to keep someone alive. It was the hardest work she'd ever done, because it required her to be vulnerable, to need help, to admit that she was just as broken as the people she'd been trying to save. But it was also the most liberating experience of her life. 6 months later, Maya's practice looked different. Instead of seeking out the most severely traumatized clients, she began working with people who were ready to do their own healing work. Instead of enabling dependence, she focused on building resilience. Her personal relationships transformed too. She began dating someone who didn't need rescuing, someone who was attracted to her strength but didn't depend on it for survival. She developed friendships based on mutual support rather than one-way caretaking. Most importantly, Maya learned the difference between helping from a place of strength and helping from a place of compulsion. "I understand now why I was drawn to broken people," Maya told Dr. Martinez during one of their final sessions. "I was trying to save the 8-year-old girl inside me by saving everyone else. And how is that 8-year-old girl now? She's learning that she was never responsible for saving anyone, that she deserved to be protected and cared for, not to be the one doing the protecting and caring. What's it like to let her be a child? Scary, but also free, like I can finally breathe." Maya had spent 20 years building a career around healing others, while avoiding her own wounds. She'd attracted broken people not because she was called to help them, but because they reflected her own unhealed trauma. Now she was learning to heal herself first, to help from a place of wholeness rather than woundedness. The pain magnet had become a healed healer, someone who could offer genuine help because she'd done her own work, not someone who needed to rescue others to avoid facing her own need for rescue. And for the first time in her life, that felt like enough. 1 year later, Maya received a call from Sarah, the client whose breakthrough had triggered Maya's own journey. "I wanted to thank you," Sarah said, "not just for the therapy, but for showing me what healthy helping looks like. I could tell something changed in you during our sessions. You became more real, more honest about the work being hard. It made me trust the process more." Maya smiled. "What made the difference for you? You stopped trying to save me and started helping me save myself." That's when I knew the healing was real. After the call, Maya sat in her office, the same office where she'd once felt drowning in others, pain, and felt something she'd never experienced before, genuine peace. She'd learned that the wounded healer archetype wasn't about being broken and helping others heal. It was about healing your own wounds so thoroughly that you could guide others toward their own healing without needing to rescue them from their journey. Maya Chen had spent 30 years avoiding her own pain by fixing everyone else's. Now she was learning that the greatest gift she could offer was not her rescue, but her own hard-won wholeness. And that made all the difference, for her clients, for her relationships, and most importantly, for the 8-year-old girl who'd finally learned she was worth saving too. Have you ever found yourself drawn to broken people who need fixing? Sometimes our compulsion to rescue others is actually our wounded inner child trying to rescue ourselves. The healing begins when we turn that compassion inward. Names and details changed for privacy, inspired by Jungian therapeutic principles.